Thank you for joining our webinar. I hope you enjoyed that housekeeping video. I'm Lucas Reagan, your moderator for today's session. Before we dive into the exciting content ahead, I'd like to address a few housekeeping items that also were mentioned in the video, but as a reminder, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. We will make sure to document them and get them answered during or after the webinar. Also, as you can see, this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be made available to the group afterwards. So first, we're going to go ahead and dive into a poll question to get a grasp on the general familiarity with organizational network analysis. I'll give everyone a minute to submit their answers. Make sure to hit the submit button to be able to actually see your answer being recorded. I'll give everyone another 15 or so seconds. A being beginner, I am new to ONA with little to no experience or knowledge of its concepts and applications. B being intermediate, I have some understanding and experience with ONA, including its basic concepts and applications. C being advanced, I am highly experienced with ONA, with a deep understanding of its principles and extensive application in various contents. If you haven't hit submit already, please do so. So here are the general poll results. Seems like a majority is either beginner, is beginner, and the rest is intermediate. So we do not have any advanced folks. Luckily, we do have a great panel here who will hopefully be able to educate you all, and you feel like you'll maybe be able to step into the intermediate or advanced category following this webinar. So during our webinar, we'll run through the following agenda. We'll go through our introductions. We'll run through an overview of ONA, then the understanding the role of ONA in today's strategic imperatives, ServiceNow's presence in AI, exploring ONA use cases, and then finishing up with a panel discussion with all of our speakers today that you will soon meet. And then I will go ahead and conclude our webinar today. So we'll run through the panelist introductions. First, I would like you to meet our speakers. Hello once again. In addition to being your moderator, I'm a partner solutions manager at ServiceNow. Over the past year, I've had the privilege of collaborating with Francisco on the development of his ONA solution, which was listed on the store this past summer. I'm very excited about the promising trajectory of ONA in the coming years. Now I'll go ahead and pass it over to my colleague, Gretchen.
Thank you, Lucas. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Gretchen Alarcon, and I have the privilege of leading our employee workflows organization for ServiceNow. So for those of you who are current ServiceNow customers, that includes things like our HR service delivery products, our Employee Center Pro, which is our portal, our workplace service delivery products, and then our legal products as well. So really excited to be here with you today and talk about this fantastic new area that I think a lot of organizations are going to get a lot of value out of. So with that, let me hand it over to Diane. Diane, are you on mute? I think we can't hear you yet.
I apologize.
There she is.
Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and I am an advisor to Cognitive Talent Solutions. It's one of the companies that I spend time with to help them as they develop their product, and I'm just so excited that they're listed on the ServiceNow platform. So that is terrific. Other things that I do, I was the former CHRO at IBM. I'm currently on the board of several companies, including Kraft Heinz and Centivo, which is a healthcare company. I am a senior advisor at BCG. So that's what I do with my time. And I am just delighted to be here and talk about one of the big passions of my life, which is organization network analysis. Okay, Francisco.
Great. Thanks, Diane. Hi, everyone. My name is Francisco Marin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Cognitive Talent Solutions. We are an organizational network analysis vendor headquartered in Palo Alto, California. And I've been working with CTS for about 6 years now. Before that, I used to work at IBM as a business analytics leader. And CTS is a proud partner of ServiceNow since the beginning of 2023. As Lucas mentioned, we've deployed our native ONA app on the ServiceNow store, including some exciting Gen AI capabilities. And I look forward to sharing with you today my experience with ONA and raise awareness about this exciting technology.
Thank you, everyone. I think Francisco's going to go ahead and give us a quick overview of ONA, and we'll then continue with the rest of the webinar.
Perfect. Thanks, Lucas. So let's talk about ONA. Nowadays, across many companies, employee experience is suffering from leadership gaps, communication, silos and bottlenecks, and other productivity obstacles. And this is caused in turn by factors like unclear power dynamics, information blockages, and excessive collaboration. So in this context, it has become a strategic imperative for companies to get a better understanding of their social capital. Social capital refers to the network of informal interactions that employees have across the company, whereas human capital refers to the knowledge, the skill, and competencies that employees possess. So in that context, ONA has emerged as a very powerful solution that allows companies to analyze and visualize the informal interactions that exist across the organization. They can do this by leveraging active data sources like online surveys, or passive data sources like the digital footprint in collaborative tools like Office 365 or Slack. Now, what is exciting about the partnership that CTS has with ServiceNow is that traditionally, when companies wanted to adopt ONA capabilities, they had only two options. They could either work with small vendors and they have to share sensitive information outside their existing IT infrastructure, or otherwise they had very limited options with mainstream vendor with low actionability. But thanks to the work we're doing with ServiceNow, now companies have at their disposal all the experience of a small dedicated vendor together with the scalability of ServiceNow within their existing IT infrastructure. Obviously, when we work with ONA, it's very important to take into consideration that data privacy is a very important factor. So when we leverage active data sources like online surveys, we need to make sure that employees provide their consent to participate in the survey. They need to be able to revoke that consent at any time, and they need to have direct line with the data protection officer. When we work with passive data sources like Office 365, for example, the ideal scenario is to only analyze aggregated metadata, and so analyze only teams of 5 or more people, and then also not analyze the content of the communications, but only the metadata of those communications. That way we can get actionable insights in a way that is respectful with the employee's right to privacy. So I'll pause it there. Just maybe to mention that one of the main things that we do with ONA is to identify who are the informal leaders in the organization. These are people that are very influential independently of their role or level of experience, and that we can use for a variety of purposes related to change management and leadership development, onboarding, and other use cases we'll be discussing later on. But I'll pause it there, and I'll hand it over to Diane so she can explain how ONA is aligned with today's strategic imperatives.
Thanks, Francisco. So look, I mean, you just heard a little bit about the inner workings of ONA and how it operates. I'm going to talk just a little bit about it from the standpoint of an executive and board member and why I think it's important. You know, there was a time when you had an org chart, right, that told you exactly, you know, how information flowed in an organization. It flowed, you know, down and up a hierarchy. And of course, we all know that doesn't happen anymore. People actually work in networks. They work across departments. They work across units. They even work across companies, right, to get their work done. And so when you're thinking about something like AI or Gen AI, you have to really understand information flows. So that's, I'll get into that in a minute. The second thing that's happened, of course, is people are working in a hybrid or remote environment. And so you actually can't see what's happening in the organization in terms of, bottlenecks and that sort of thing. So those are the things that I think are really driving why ONA has become so important at the executive level to understand what's happening. And the way I think about it, ONA is like an X-ray into the inner workings of an organization. And so as such, it is a powerful tool. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So when we think about some of the key business issues that we talk about, in organizations, the first one is how are we going to introduce generative AI and AI? And we all know it's going to have some implications for how work is done, right? Whether it's augmenting what an individual is doing, or whether it's actually changing how work gets done. And I've seen both in my time at IBM, for sure. In the case of the first one, which is it's augmenting, that's going to free someone's time up to do something else, right? Which is terrific because they may actually be able to do higher order things. And that will require perhaps some training for them to do that. They may have been doing more rudimentary work, and now they're looking for patterns in the data, that kind of thing. So that's important. And ONA is going to help you understand actually how all that information is flowing across the organization so that you can make those decisions. The second thing is productivity and innovation, two, hot buttons for everybody right now. And again, as I said, this is really giving you a window into how work is actually being executed. And you can find the bottlenecks. You saw that little chart that Francisco showed you. And when it all comes together with one person, you can see that that person actually either very popular, but could be a bottleneck, right? So you're going to get that from the data, whether it's active ONA or positive ONA or it's passive ONA. You're going to get that information to see, okay, so we've got an issue here. It may be the delegation authority, it may be the governance. What is it that's causing this? And we can then adjust and free people up. You're also going to look at the effectiveness of your hybrid or remote workplace. So, for example, you might find, and I think we have all found, that people's networks shrunk during COVID. And that tends to happen when people are working remotely. They're not building new bridges, they're not seeing someone in the cafeteria and sitting down for a chat. And all that kind of builds, the bonds of trust that enables you to pick up the phone when something happens and, call someone that you may not work with a whole lot, who then introduces you to someone else who says, oh, this person can get that done for you. That kind of, grease in the works is important for every organization. And so what companies have done is they've said, okay, what does it look like today before we have, done anything about it? And then let's try some things. Let's try bringing people together for various events and that kind of thing. And does it improve? So the before and the after tells you whether people's networks have improved, whether they're broader, whether you've got more boundary spanners who are working across organizations. That's the kind of thing that will give you a window into whether all the money you just spent on that event was worth it, right? So it's, I think, an important way for companies to figure it out. The other thing I've seen companies do is, taking a snapshot of the day, right? So at 4 o'clock, it seems like that's the time people are focusing. They're not spending as much time collaborating on email, on Slack, and so forth. So maybe we'll just call that a no meeting time, so that everybody can use that time effectively. So it's again, it's that window that we're looking for. Burnout and collaboration overload are a big issue, and one that companies are trying to solve for, because it's essential for obviously work life and the health of the organization. And so to be able to understand when we've got overload, when we've got way too many hours being spent, that's another one. Onboarding effectiveness, again, you can see for various organizations, to what extent does a new hire have a really healthy network after 4 months, after 6 months, after a year? And you know, what was it that we did in the onboarding with this individual versus someone else that caused that network to be so great? M&A integration, same thing, right? You're looking for cross-unit collaboration, not just the sort of formal, but also the informal networking that's happening. And then outsourcing is my favorite one, because actually I found that even though we had a great outsourcing contract, we were spending so much time on governance that it really wasn't worth it, right? And it's a tax that takes time and effort, and you have to put a dollar figure on that to figure out if the outsourcing was really worth it. And having that ONA is helpful. Of course, customer experience. So there again, you're looking at, where do we have a bottleneck? You know, we have bad customer experience. Well, let's look at the information flow from when a customer, you know, problem comes in, then what happens? And of course, you can see it all, and you might actually see that it's all landing on some person's desk or whatever. Effectiveness of organization design. You might have decided to move from a sales role to a solutions role. Well, if you're in a solutions role, you're obviously integrating a number of different functions together. Is that working? Do these people who used to be salespeople, have they made that transition to integrating you know, a variety of different perspectives into their proposals? Same thing, you know, big question companies are asking with AI is, should my people be generalists or specialists? You know, is AI is bringing a lot of expertise. And again, you can use the information flow to make that decision. You know, the effort of bringing together so many specialists sometimes is not worth it, and you want to train generalists. This next one should say followership, not fellowship. And what I mean by that is what is so fabulous about ONA is it actually finds for you your informal leaders, people go to when they need help, advice, and people who really energize them when they're, you know, needing to get going. Those are the people that pop up, and they may not be your formal leaders. These are the people that you might want to put into your leadership pipeline because they do have followership. And these are the people you might want to recruit to be change agents when you're making change. So that's a really hidden benefit of ONA. And then finally, inclusion rather than just diversity. We may have a diverse population, but if the people from the minority populations or the females are being excluded from the informal networks that are happening, where, you know, decisions are being made, then that's not inclusion, right? So you've got diversity, but not inclusion. And I know Francisco has done some great work in that space and in covering where, you know, there are inclusion issues, even though there's diversity. So with that, I'm going to now ask for your thoughts about kind of what are the top of mind, top priority issues that you have when you're thinking about the priorities you have going into 2024. So there's listed here 5 ones, and there may be others, but let's just see, you know, if you were going to say what's your highest priority of these, is it redesigning work and jobs so that you can introduce generative AI and AI? Is it improving your remote onboarding effectiveness? Is it identifying best candidates for skills development? Those, you know, the people with the followership that I talked about. Is it identifying informal leaders to help facilitate change and join your leadership pipeline? Or is it understanding the impact of interventions to improve your hybrid work environment? In other words, improving the networks and the collaboration that happens when people work in a hybrid or remote mode. So those are the 5. I want you to vote on one of them, and I'll give you a few more seconds to make your decision, and then we'll pop up the answer. We can keep going. We got 28 of 78 submitted. Cranking up there. Okay, I'm gonna move to the next slide. We've got over half now. All right. So it looks like the majority of this group is focusing on how do we introduce AI and generative AI, and what does that mean for work design, jobs, and work. Great, that's very exciting. And then the next one is understanding the impact of interventions to improve hybrid work networks and collaboration. Very exciting. And then you've got some here for identifying informal leaders. Terrific. Well, thank you for that. That's going to help us as we move forward with our conversation. And now I'm going to pass the baton over to Gretchen.
All right, thank you, Diane, and thank you everyone for giving us the time today. I'm really excited to talk to you about where we are from a generative AI and an AI perspective at ServiceNow. What I'm finding really interesting is we talk to organizations about what they're trying to accomplish in the AI space. Is many organizations right now are viewing this as a catalyst for change. In previous examples, when people started thinking about what to do with AI, it was kind of more about, well, AI is something I should be aware of, and if the vendor brings it in, I'll think about using it. But now we are really seeing organizations thinking about how can we do even more with the services that we have, with the technologies that we have, in order to think about how we might drive change in our organization, which frankly, right now, I think we can all say there's been a lot of change happening over the last couple of years. So when I think about where we are as ServiceNow, we've actually had many AI offerings on the platform for quite some time. And those go from all sorts of different areas, whether we're talking about intelligence, looking into how documents are tracked in an organization, looking into how we use AI to provide better search results. We've done a lot of work around how do we help with predictive intelligence, where we could kind of say, what's the next thing you should do as we look at solving a case or taking steps in an employee journey. So there are a lot of different things that we have done with AI over time. And what's important from that standpoint is that, customers are trusting our AI capabilities really to say this is something that is important in terms of driving our organization. Now, of course, all of the buzz is about generative AI and what can that help us do and how can we do more? And, when we think about how generative AI can really help our organizations, there are kind of a couple different patterns that really we see organizations thinking about. First of all, it's understanding context and intent. So when an employee asks a question like, when will my tuition reimbursement be processed? Generative AI can help us in terms of understanding that the employee might be a little frustrated because they're asking and they're looking for an immediate answer, and can help them to understand what the result is. So that might be a specific date, or it might be tying to a policy to say, in general, tuition reimbursements are processed after successful submission of completion dates or something like that. So we can think about how this might work. One of the things that I find really interesting when we think about what this does for a virtual agent is it helps reinforce your brand, because it helps an employee see what it is that what they're asking and how the company is responding. Another thing generative AI can do very, very well, which is where I thought it really ties in here, is synthesizing and summarizing existing information. Now, today, most of the examples we've been using when we think about what to do with generative AI, we're thinking about summarizing policy or summarizing where a case is, so that if I am an agent and I'm picking up a case for the first time, I can actually see what the results are, kind of where is the case so far, and not have to read through lots of content. But it also can summarize some other interesting information that relates here to what we're talking about with networks. So, for example, could AI help us understand, if I'm coming in to the office, I'm a hybrid worker, which other people that I regularly collaborate with will be in the office today, and where will they be located? So maybe if I'm thinking about coming in and I see that other people that I tend to work with are coming in, I want to make sure I'm sitting in their neighborhood. and that we've got plans for lunch. So we can use AI to actually help connect people and summarize, information to help them make better decisions. And then when we think about generating content, so how can we use AI to create new information? Some of this might be people kind of saying, responses, as I mentioned, a virtual agent giving information to an employee, but also using AI to help people understand, what is next? How else could I help connect with a new person? Or, there are some other peers or other things going on that you might need to be aware of. So generating content is another key capability for us. Now, I will say one of the biggest questions we get asked when we talk about AI in general, especially when we're talking about people, is, can I trust it? You're going to be making decisions about what's going on where in terms of the overall usage of your data. You want to make sure that it's being secured, especially when we're talking about people data. This is just more than we need to have, going across multiple different systems. And so it's really important to have the right guardrails in place. It's important to know what's going on with the data, and super important that people can trust what the data is being used for. So we have a very strong opinion that, this is something where we want to make sure you've got centralized governance, that you are aware of the data usage and what's happening. And for us, when it comes to generative AI, that means that we have built our own large language model. We don't want data going outside. If you as an organization feel strongly that you would like to have more usage of an external large language model like an OpenAI or Google Cloud, we can support that. But we feel really strongly that it's important for us to have AI content using our own large language because it's optimized for what people use ServiceNow for, and we can optimize for HR data. So we don't have to worry about where content is being shared, how it might be used. So as we think about where we're going to go next in terms of employee experiences and kind of what happens, there are two key things that we think about in terms of what organizations are looking for. First, how do you ask natural language questions and receive direct and specific answers? Something tied to you, it's personalized, you can get that data. And second, how do you take actions through a simple, conversational capability? So, very easy to do. And then underneath that, three key things. First, it needs to work for all personas. It needs to be, leveraging anyone who is working in the organization, regardless of where they are or how they work. It needs to be integrated with data from other systems in a very seamless way so we can leverage it. And finally, it needs to know when not to engage. So we want to make sure when we're talking about generative AI, if someone is asking a question that is sensitive, like employee relations, or they've maybe gone beyond, something that would be a more innocuous question, generative AI needs to know to say, this is not, I'm just a bot. This is not something I can answer, and you need to talk to a human being. So we see those as key components. But I'm super excited to think about how this applies to organization network analysis, whether that is thinking about how we can better understand who's collaborating with who, how can we make sure certain skills are available to people, or how can we help people understand, where they could be developing further by strengthening their networks, which might help them be on the road to a new opportunity, a new job, new experiences within the organization. So I'm going to pause there because I want to make sure I allow time for communication and collaboration at the end. And I'm going to go ahead and hand this on to Francisco.
Thank you, Gretchen. So let's talk about some key organizational network analysis use cases. We've established that ONA is a method that allows us to analyze and visualize the informal interactions that exist across the organization. But now let's provide a bit more detail on how we can use those social capital metrics. Here, we're going to highlight three primary use cases related to change management, leadership development, and employee growth and development. When it comes to change management, what we do with ONA is to identify the informal leaders, and then we leverage them as early adopters of strategic changes. By doing this, we can accelerate the adoption of strategic changes by 70%, and we can also make sure that those informal leaders are not going to use their influence to create resistance against the changes we are trying to implement. This is really applicable to any type of change. Think, for example, of adoption of agile methodologies, where these informal leaders would be your agile champions. Or, for example, if you are adopting a cultural change, these informal leaders would be your cultural ambassadors. If you're implementing a ERP, the informal leaders would be your ERP super users. So again, it's really, really important to make sure that those informal leaders are using their influence to advance our objectives rather than creating resistance against them and become what we call negative informal leaders. The second use case about leadership development is one of the most actionable ones. And here, the challenge that many companies are facing nowadays is that in the context of leadership development programs and succession planning initiatives, the HR teams have to rely on the recommendations from immediate supervisors across the company that provide candidates to join those programs. But especially in large organizations, it's very difficult for HR practitioners to have daily experience working with those candidates. And the problem here is that our research at CTS shows that only 1/3 of high performers are recognized as informal leaders by their peers. This is an issue because if people that don't have informal leadership end up occupying formal leadership roles in the organization, then people reporting to those leaders might not feel engaged, and the company might have issues when trying to advance a certain agenda or promote certain strategic imperatives. So what we do here is to make sure, by leveraging the results of ONA, that the candidates to leadership development programs and succession planning initiatives are simultaneously high performers and informal leaders. And by doing that, some companies have changed the leadership pipeline by up to 70%. The third use case is about employee growth and development. Basically, it's about making sure that we allow those informal leaders to have the tools and resources that they need to maximize their impact in the organization and to make actually a positive impact in the company. This has different dimensions. It has a dimension of matching these informal leaders with mentors to make sure that they can follow the right steps towards achieving the objective that they want to achieve. In some cases, it's occupying a formal leadership role. In some cases, it's pursuing a career in a certain part of the organization. But these people are showing signs of potential, so we want to make sure that we pair them with people with more experience in the company. Another dimension of this use case has to do with proposing targeted development opportunities for those informal leaders. When you have to launch a skill development program, because, for example, you want your company to build strategic skills related to generative AI or agile methodologies or other strategic skills, it's very, very important to train first or at an earlier stage those informal leaders. Because if that informal leader builds a skill, it's going to have a much greater impact than if the person that receives that early training is a person that occupies a peripheral position in the network. So again, these are three examples of key use cases, but because the role of ONA is to generate social capital metrics that complement human capital metrics, and really because the value of ONA lies in its complementarity. It really shines when we cross-reference it with other information across the organization. ONA offers a variety of use cases that can be really actionable. So with that, we're going to go to the Q&A section, and would love to get the questions from the audience and solve any questions you may have.
Yeah. Thank you, Francisco, and thank you to all the speakers. As Francisco mentioned, right now is a great opportunity to utilize the Q&A chat area. I'll be able to pull from those questions as well. We do have some prepared in order to get this conversation started while you all put that into the chat. So the first question being for the general panel, with the rapid evolution of AI and ONA, what do you believe are the most crucial skills professionals should develop to stay ahead in this changing landscape?
Okay, well, I'll go first. So I think, one of the things that we've learned about AI and Gen AI is that it actually can do a lot of work that professionals feel is part of their profession. And so what doesn't it do? It doesn't relate to people in an empathetic way, because it doesn't have that ability to have that interaction at a human level, obviously. And so what we're seeing is that every profession is going to have to get so much better at the human side of what they do. So I would suggest for everybody, all of us, to think about that. How good are we at that? Are we getting good feedback on how effective we are in our interactions with others? We can't inspire people with Gen AI. Gen AI is not going to inspire someone to do their best work, but a person is. And yet, Gen AI can supply much expertise that their manager perhaps had supplied in the past. So I think that's a really important thought for all of us, right? Is let's get our best act together around our interpersonal capabilities.
I 100% agree, Diane. And I'd actually add, I think the other thing we're going to see is those cases that become, more requiring of judgment or discernment. Generative AI can summarize the standards and can kind of start to understand and infer, if this person is, angry or frustrated or what have you, but it's not necessarily able to understand, in this case, we need an exception, right? So I think thinking about when does judgment come into play in some of these areas. The other thing I would say is, as organizations are looking at some of these changes, there is absolutely going to be a need more broadly for a learning mindset, because this is the first big technical challenge or, significant challenge that is going to impact knowledge workers. In the past, when we talked about where AI is going to have changes, usually we focused on automation of routine tasks, which tends to hit more deskless workers. Generative AI is really going to hit knowledge workers, and a lot of organizations are not yet ready to think about what does that mean for shifting skills. So, someone who's proactive should be starting to think about, what's next on my learning list, and how can I think about where is my next, step in my career? If I didn't have to do some of these more repetitive and mundane things, what would that free me up to do? So at an individual level, being intellectually curious and thinking about how you might make connections to the next things that you want to accomplish within your organization.
That's such a great point. Yeah. No, I mean, look, I think the fact is we all have to keep learning, right? And whether it's taking the MIT course on AI or simply learning how to be a prompt engineer, we all have to do something to stay on top of this. And if we're fooling around with the various Gen AI capabilities that are out there, we're learning a lot. And we're upping our capabilities. And I just encourage everybody to do that, right? It's all at our disposal right now. There's so much information, so much capability that we could be building.
I cannot agree more with that, because you can study courses of prompt engineering and study the theory, really, but best way to learn how to interact with Gen AI is to actually practice. And by the way, I wanted to mention that as part of this webinar, we'll be offering a free course of ONA in Udemy, where you can actually go and play with the Gen AI on the ONA technology. So it's a great start, actually, for anybody that is actually wondering how you can leverage Gen AI with ONA. You can ask it to identify silos, bottlenecks, informal leaders, high potential employees, and there is no better way to learn how to work with Gen AI than to really practice and iterate as much as possible.
Yeah. All great points. Thank you so much for your responses. Here's a question from the audience. How do you identify individual informal leaders for skill development while also protecting individual privacy?
That's a great question. So when we implement active ONA, which refers to ONA by leveraging an online survey, we need to analyze the result at individual level, because we need to understand who those informal leaders are, right? But again, as I mentioned earlier, it's very important that employees provide their explicit consent to participate in the survey. They need to be able to revoke it at any time. They need to be given direct link with the data protection officer to solve any doubts that they have at any time. And then basically you need to be very conscious of how you share that information across the organization. The logistics on how is determining if a person becomes an informal leader basically is by taking into consideration a number of informal interactions like sharing information, technical support, personal support, or inspiration, and then basically comparing the results with the results that other people get across the organization. But the key there is that it's not about you assessing yourself, but you recognizing the value of other peers, and your position in the influence ranking will depend on the nominations that you receive from your peers. That's why it's a very positive environment, and it doesn't have a negative impact on the engagement of the participants.
I think it's important as well to kind of think about, and I think you said it at the top, Francisco, there's a bit of here about, nothing about me without me, right? I want people to know how my data is being used. There is value always in understanding who is collaborating or who is connecting. And some of that is just traffic and, in systems, right? Who people are sending emails to or receiving content from. I think the important thing there, though, is understanding, how is that going to be used? And part of valuing ONA is to understand that different people have different roles that they play. Some people are fantastic connectors and they build bridges between other organizations. Other people may not be bridgers, but they may create a lot of content that is really useful for people. Or other people may say, I don't really create content that much, but when I do, people listen, right? So there are different patterns here. So we can talk about this in terms of valuing the skills and the capabilities people have here. I'd also say the important thing when we think about someone who's trying to grow, every conversation I have when someone's thinking about where they want to go with their career next, usually there's an aspiration, right? I want to become a director someday. How do I get there? And there's not always an understanding of how. And that how should include who are the people who could help you? How do you build those connections? And most people are very open to that when you talk about network analysis for things like mentoring or growth. It's more a case of if it's being used, without their knowledge, that people get frustrated. So again, for someone to say, yes, I'm open to being a mentor, most people are going to say yes. And then we're able to actually leverage that information to help people grow.
Yeah, thank you, Francisco, and thank you, Gretchen, for your responses. I think this one is going to be a little bit more targeted towards you, Francisco. And this is I believe in question to CTS. Is all of that based on the ServiceNow platform, or is it offered by ServiceNow and pulls data across multiple sources?
So there is what we have is a native ONA app within the ServiceNow ecosystem. It's not an integration with CTS ONA software, but it's actually an application that clients can leverage within their existing IT infrastructure. This is a very important factor because typically the challenges that small vendors have is that you have a long onboarding process, and then you have significant issues to scale from a global replication. But those issues are mitigated by providing clients these ONA capabilities within the ServiceNow platform. And replying also to the previous question, the number 10, I really believe that right now the ServiceNow app is the leading ONA app in the market because it combines active and passive data sources, integrating generative AI capabilities for additional actionability. And that's a key differentiating factor. In the context of organizational design, which was the previous question as well, the main use case has to do with identifying organizational silos and bottlenecks and proposing mitigating actions. This can be done through generative AI, but also actually in the next iteration, the Gen AI will actually be able to implement those actions, for example, by introducing via email people from different organizational silos and scheduling a meeting based on their availability to mitigate that silo. So we are really opening doors for levels of actionability that are completely unprecedented.
Thank you, Francisco. And here's a little bit more of a general question for the panel. So can ONA be applied to offline networks, such as those found in organizational structures or supply chains? And if so, what are the challenges and limitations?
That's a good one for Francisco.
Yes. Well, here's the thing. Networks provide the most effective and efficient framework to understand any type of decentralized environment. That's really why I'm so passionate about networks, because the implications for the future of work are huge. So what I mean by this is, especially on the passive ONA side, at the end of the day, it doesn't make much of a difference if you plug data from Microsoft Office, or if you plug data from Slack, or if you plug data from a database connected to your supply chain, right? The structure of nodes and edges is exactly the same. Now, there are plenty of use cases of network analytics applied to supply chain, applied to different organizational structures, and actually specifically to organizational structures, there is a very interesting use case where you can actually use generative AI to simulate organizational restructuring and see how the organization could be adjusted to maximize certain goals. But again, like as far as you have a data source where you have different entities interacting with each other, whether they are people or they are actually other type of entities interacting with each other, you can leverage that metadata to do network analytics.
I just want to say one thing about the privacy thing, because I think it's so important. It's such an important attribute of the product that CTS has, and that is that it takes privacy seriously. It doesn't silently do it in the background like other ONA products do, and that's actually one of the reasons I was attracted to CTS. I think it's important for every company to have some kind of open policy about what their privacy considerations are in the use of AI. And if they haven't already done so, you as members of those organizations should press for it. At IBM, we had a motto in HR, which was just because we can doesn't mean we should. And we published our code of ethics around how we were going to use people's data. And we held ourselves accountable to it. And I think this is just so important because trust is critical to all of this. Every one of those interactions that Francisco has talked about has to be something that people know about and feel trusted, and it's going to be used in a way that they understand. So I just really wanted to underline that point because it's just so important.
Yeah, and that's where the feature of customization is really important, because an organization might decide actually to run a first ONA pilot and only share results at the aggregate level, both on active and passive ONA. And then step by step, start focusing on the more positive use cases and really just navigate that journey at their own pace. That's something that you can do with this application. You can generate customized reports and share them across the organization based on your preferences. And, reading again the question from Mustafa Ahmed, I understand probably what he meant is about what happens when you have blue-collar jobs that work offline and they don't have right access to corporate email or similar scenario. In that situation, our best practice is to actually use a QR code and allow them to complete the survey through the QR code. Other companies decide just to focus on corporate employees. Either way is fine. But I always encourage companies to really try to manage and understand those internal collaboration dynamics with the wider scope possible. But the use of QR codes is a good mitigation for those situations.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that point, Diane. It reminded me of a quote that Bill once said, trust is earned in drops and lost in buckets. And so I think what CTS does is, continue to build that trust throughout. And I think that was a beautiful point. And I guess we have time for one more question from the audience. How do AI-powered approaches for ONA navigate the trade-off between preserving user privacy and extracting valuable insights from personal or sensitive data shared within online communities?
Yeah. Again, data privacy, right? We see that it's a very, very important factor. What is very important with generative AI is to be very transparent about what is the data that is being shared with whom, and then let companies and users decide if they proactively want to engage with that feature. Right now, because Gen AI is becoming ubiquitous, there are different scenarios, right? There are scenarios where there is a combination of so-called retrieval augmented generation technology that is basically like a library of concepts that we provide together with a connection with OpenAI. Sometimes it's like native capabilities within existing IT infrastructure, right? But it's very important transparency and communication and understand what metrics are shared. At CTS, really where we put the red line is we never analyze the content of communications, and we do not analyze data from collaborative tools like Office 365, Slack, Jira, Jammer at individual level. We only analyze it at aggregate level, meaning groups of 5 or more people. If you do it that way, we are positive that it will have a positive impact on the employee engagement and will respect employees' right to privacy. Again, there are different players in the industry that apply different approaches. Some major players in the ONA industry actually have to walk back some features that were rolled out and patented because they were receiving a lot of backlash from the industry. And in our case, and actually with the full support from Diane, we had clear that we wanted to be perceived as privacy advocates because ONA is a very powerful technology, and as a powerful technology, it can be used to make a great positive impact or great negative impact, depending on what's your approach, right? So we want to be as conservative as possible when it comes to data privacy.
And I think a key thing that I just want to underline as well is that anytime we're talking about using AI, in my opinion, it is a very strong, it's important to know that AI is going to give guidance, but there needs to be a human making the final decision. So, if you choose to have AI find these connections, suggest mentors or suggest collaborators, et cetera, it's not going to do that on your behalf. There is still a human who's going to say, yes, this is someone I'd like to collaborate with, or yes, I want to take this action. Same way that, if you want to start this whole process, someone says, yes, we want to. So when we think about, a good use of AI, whether we're talking for ONA or in general, we want to make sure people understand. We want to have people see and be notified if AI is being used. So we've made a strong commitment inside ServiceNow that whenever something is leveraging AI, whether that's for a search or for a virtual agent or what have you, we are giving indicators to let people know that AI is being used. And then secondly, when it comes to actually making the decision, we want to make sure people are very clear as well that you are actively choosing to use this technology. The same thing that when, Google Maps first started, Google Maps provides the guidance, but the person driving the car chooses whether or not they're going to follow the route that Google Maps has suggested. Same thing here. The AI will provide the map and provide the guidance, but the individual needs to make the final decision.
And it takes time, right? I think, people need to build trust in the system. One of the things we found at IBM, we had a compensation a program where, the AI would actually recommend how you spend your compensation merit budget on your employees. And at first, only 30% of them took the guidance. And it took into account all kinds of stuff and really multi-factor, right? What are the skills, what's the availability in the marketplace, what's the turnover rate, all that kind of stuff, as well as the performance and where they were in their range. And now, 60% are taking that recommendation. So, it's taken time for managers to feel comfortable that, that was a good suggestion and it's given me a good rationale for why that I could share with the employee. And they're starting to see it, or travel expense. Before it was like, I have to look at everyone's travel expenses, but I don't really have time. Well, now it's like, okay, it's finding the flaws in the expense reports, and they're finding where there might be some fraud. And so I don't actually have to look at that so seriously anymore. It'll come back to me if there's a question. So it takes sometimes a little bit of time for people to feel comfortable with the recommendations from AI, but in the end, it may improve their productivity when they build up that trust.
Yeah, and in our experience as well with existing clients, the area where Gen AI is helping the most is with storytelling, because when you deploy ONA across a company with 300,000 employees, you can actually generate executive summaries at scale that will contain information that is relevant for certain stakeholders. But you will need an army of thousands of consultants to be able to explain individually to all those stakeholders the insights. However, with Gen AI, they can actually ask those questions and get really mature replies in real time. So that's where we see that Gen AI is making a significant difference.
Yeah. Thanks so much, everyone. We really appreciate the discussion and also the audience for asking great questions. So as we conclude, throughout our webinar today, we delved into the transformative capabilities of AI-powered organizational network analysis and its potential to unlock value for your organization. It is crucial to remember that the true value lies not only in the technology, but in how you leverage these insights to drive positive change within your organization. As you continue on your ONA journey, envision a future where these insights become catalysts for innovation, collaboration, and organizational excellence. Your commitment to harnessing the power of AI in organizational network analysis positions you on the forefront of shaping a more agile and connected workplace. To support your ongoing exploration, we're excited to provide valuable resources following the webinar. They will be sent out. Look out for a co-branded ebook and an exclusive Udemy course that Francisco previously just talked about. He developed it alongside his CTS team. These resources aim to equip you with practical knowledge, enabling you to deepen your understanding of ONA. And looking back at the initial survey, I hope that we've all been able to move up the ladder and we're more in an intermediate or advanced category following this discussion. So thank you all so much for your time today. Please feel free to reach out to Francisco to potentially schedule a demo at CTS, or reach out directly to the ServiceNow Partner Manager, Cassie Thompson. Both those emails are included on the screen right now. And thank you once again to Diane, Gretchen, and Francisco for taking time out of their day to teach us a little bit more about ONA.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks again. Everyone.